Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. As we continue to deliberate the various developments both here in Israel and throughout the region, it's always important to highlight that 165 days ago, the Islamist terror group from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 134 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Owen. Amir, what can you update us with on the latest?
You know, Jonathan, you keep saying, and rightly so, that they assaulted southern Israel. But at the height of the conflict, they also launched rockets at the Tel Aviv area. Now they can't do it, first of all, because most of the rockets were intercepted. And then when the IDF forces got to the launching areas, they destroyed whatever they found, the rockets which remained, or missiles, and the launch areas. So at one time, this was a very high-intensity fight. Now it dwindled down. Of course, there is still fighting. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed over the last 2 days, both of them in the northern part of Gaza, around the Shifa hospital, which goes to show you that an occupation by an army is never complete. There are always pockets of resistance or people coming back. Perhaps they were hiding there all the time. But the war itself seems to be on hold. There is no ceasefire, fighting goes on, but the war is waiting political decisions. And obviously, the major story of the day has been President Biden's call with Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, at the end of which Netanyahu agreed to send a whole of government team representing ministries having to do with military, diplomatic, and humanitarian affairs to confer with their counterparts in Washington. The practical meaning of this move is that the operation in Rafah, or what the Americans call a major military operation, will be delayed until such time that there is an agreement between Washington and Jerusalem. And obviously, parallel to that, there are talks in Doha, Qatar, between Israel and indirectly Hamas through mediators regarding a hostage release deal, which will entail a 6-week pause in the war. And therefore, there is quite the feeling in Israel of what one may remember in Europe, in Western Europe, in the spring of 1940, a phony war. It was not the end of the war. The war was resumed. But right now, it seems as if we are on hold.
Indeed. Well, of course, the interagency delegation that Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, spoke about after the phone conversation, which Netanyahu also referred to, but he was very limited in elaborating on the contents, aims to basically mitigate any misunderstanding and to try and alleviate U.S. concerns, vocal U.S. concerns about the looming offensive into the border town of Rafah. But at the same time, there remains also one sentence that he highlighted. President Biden remains bone deep, as he referred to it, committed to Israel's long-term security. Of course, the interpretation of what that means is quite different between Washington and Jerusalem.
But it's not symmetrical. The two sides are not co-equal. And in addition to the obvious reasons, the superpower and Israel, now that President Biden is supposed to look at the plan and authorize it, he will own it. And if there is then a catastrophe, humanitarian wise, in Rafah or elsewhere in Gaza, he will be accountable. And therefore, he will scrutinize it very thoroughly before he allows it to proceed.
Not co-equal, I agree. Of course, it's a double-edged sword since equality is also a matter of sharing a certain burden. The sacrifice of lives versus the sacrifice of a seat. But we'll talk about that another time. General Gavish, Mr. Owen just mentioned the matter of occupation of a territory is never an easy matter, particularly when this territory is terror-infested, with the operatives also part and parcel of the various clans that make up that population in that specific territory. I'd like to hear your perspective on the complexities related to trying and mop out the various terror cells that remain within the northern Gaza Strip. Naturally, they're very dynamic with the subterranean infrastructure granting them the capacity to maneuver from one place to another. What can you tell us about that? And just for the sake of our viewers, even though everybody is quite familiar with you at this stage, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. Please.
Thank you, Jonathan. Always pleasure to be here, mainly with our co-partners. This time we have Mr. Rosenthal, which is always a pleasure to have him with us. I'd like to say that, first of all, maybe a word referring to what was just mentioned by Amir. I fully agree with the way that he put it. He put things, and when it comes to the IDF fighting into the Gaza Strip, we have to remember that the IDF said it just from the beginning that it would take probably around 1 year to gain the goals that we all talked about. So we are only, unfortunately, 6 months into the fight, plus minus. But we knew in the IDF that this is something that takes time. So it is not that we are toward the end of it, and we understand that this is a long campaign. So this is something that I wanted to mention. It also correlates to what you were asking, Jonathan, because now what we saw is that basically the Hamas, who was quite, let's put it this way, a very organized, almost military organization, although it is a terrorist organization, but it was built like a military. And we could say that much stronger if we compare it to a lot of militaries, even in Europe. It had 25 battalions, 6 brigades, was in a way that it was deployed within the Gaza Strip. It was a force with offensive capabilities. Unfortunately, we saw it on the 7th of October. What we see now, it's a completely different story. And what we see now is that it is in the defensive, in fully defensive mode, from his point of view. Out of the 25, they are left with 4 battalions, and they shifted their way of operation to guerrilla fight. Basically, very small groups of terrorists, not coordinated among themselves. Everyone is doing whatever he thinks that he could do, mainly toward Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip. Their ability to shoot rockets out of the Gaza Strip toward the Israeli population is almost not there anymore, for sure, when it comes to long range. So, and this put us in a very challenging mode of fight. The IDF is prepared to it. This was something that the IDF anticipated that would happen, but there are a lot of complexities in such a fight that we could see that a good example we had in the last 2 days in Shifa Hospital, that there was good intelligence. We understood that a group of people from the Hamas came over and they were intercepted by the IDF. A lot of them were killed and other were captured. So this is basically also saying that the IDF would have to react with it. And you were saying rightly, very complex way of fighting when it goes to guerrilla way of fighting.
With regard to the latter point, I think the Shifa hospital also indicates a certain effort by the Islamist Hamas, since we saw after a very long operation of surveillance, and we won't go into intelligence methods, of course, but Unit 504 and other elements of the ISA have closely monitored the Islamist Hamas trying to regroup in Shifa hospital using the compound in order to try and facilitate or reintegrate a certain command and control center in order to pretty much manage the field from a combat perspective throughout the northern Gaza Strip, something that Israel naturally was waiting for the moment in which it could strike and deal the heaviest blow to the Islamist Hamas, ultimately also killing the operations commander of Hamas in northern Gaza and other elements thereof, capturing over 250, if I'm not mistaken, terror operatives and eliminating dozens of others. But let's now turn to our next panelists, our guest, Professor Uri Rosenthal, formerly a Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, among others. It's good to see you, Uri. I'd like to immediately dive into the perception of ongoing fighting in the war in the Gaza Strip, a European perception that is seemingly prone to disinformation by media outlets of totalitarian regimes that ultimately also influence Western media outlets, since we see people, and you were the first one who actually cited that to me, about Lord Andrew Roberts, who is a very renowned, well-renowned military historian, and he highlighted that within urban military terms, the IDF has conducted unprecedented professionalism in the capacity to avoid collateral damage, providing a figure of roughly, for every terror operative, roughly 2 civilians, unfortunately, nonetheless, are killed, something that is unheard of in any military operation to date. Therefore, I'd like to ask you, when we're talking about the various challenges at hand, and from a European perspective to the whole situation, why are we still seeing so much concern about the success rate that the IDF has projected to date?
Thank you for having me. Why do we see so much discrepancy between what is developing in Gaza from the IDF angle and the way in which it is perceived in Europe? Let me follow suit on what Doron is saying. You are talking about a war which could take just a year, a full year. And Doron was saying, well, we are now halfway. Europe, irrespective of what is happening on the European continent in Ukraine, Europe is not used to a war theater of that length. And when the Israeli government decided to go into Gaza, the idea among many people was that it would be settled within a couple of days, weeks, or what have you. And so, of course, there is a common knowledge that fighting a terrorist group which is in a 400 or 500 kilometers or miles tunnel facility is quite an ordeal. Nevertheless, people would say here in Europe, why does it take so long if you are saying on the 7th and 8th of October that you will neutralize, destroy Hamas without any hesitation? So that is, I think, the answer to your question. But let me say that when you are bringing up the formidable speech of Lord Roberts in the House of Lords in the UK, I can also tell you that we hear some of these messages spreading also all in contradistinction with the overall mood on the pro-Palestinian side. For instance, one of the most famous and very reputed constitutional experts in the UK, Vernon Bogdanor, also a House of Lords, wrote a very brief piece in the Financial Times last week where he said, well, simple, keep it simple, UK friends. It's simple. Release the hostages, give a way out to the Hamas leaders, to, for instance, Qatar, if you can't do it differently. Do understand that the ceasefire is a catastrophe and will lead to a rehearsal of 7th of October. And do understand that humanitarian aid is being hampered not by the Israelis, but simply by Hamas and its gang. And he also said that when you would ever decide or go for a sort of a two-state solution, the Palestinian Authority should completely dissociate itself from Hamas. Allow me one extra remark, and that is when we look at the EU scene at the moment. Of course, we have this awful statement of the High Representative Joseph Borrell about the fact, about what he calls an intentional weaponization by Israel of the food situation in Gaza. On the other hand, which you could also take seriously, the Foreign Affairs Council of the EU was pressed by some of its member states to start a full-fledged discussion on the association treaty with Israel, but that was simply countered by a definite no by several of the more powerful member states in the EU. So don't take too much seriously the story by the High Representative, and do understand that Israel still has, as with the United States, its friends among the member states in Europe.
I will leave my own opinions of the High Representative to myself, since he has a ongoing repertoire of keeping or voicing all kind of personal opinions as sheer fact, while in fact whatever he says has nothing to do with reality. And hopefully the next representative will be more in tune with reality. But I'd like to point out one thing, Mr. Oren, and that is, where does this misconception about Israel trying to hamper the humanitarian aid from going into the Gaza Strip, since when I looked at all of the data, the trucks entering into Gaza, and I'm only talking about the trucks entering from Rafah at this point, since there are alternative entries as well that have been now activated, there's always a access of trucks that are on the Gazan side of the border, waiting to be taken by UNRWA and other international organizations that refuse to do so because they say that they do not have security, and unless Israel stops targeting Hamas operatives who supposedly provide them security, they will not go and distribute it to the civilian population.
You know, Jonathan, it's really heartwarming to see you longing for Dame Cathy Ashton and then Ms. Mogherini, who preceded Giuseppe
Persona
Borrell.
non grata here in Jerusalem.
Yeah, we never expected you to be so nostalgic.
I said the next one. I didn't want to go back.
Yes, I understand. Now, of course, it's all propaganda, But surely you understand that the professional level discussion in war colleges or in think tanks has nothing to do with the public arena. Lord Roberts or Colonel John Spencer, whom Netanyahu always quotes, they are not going to convince politicians or pontificators. And if one takes the figure of more than 30,000 Gazans being killed up to now, and let's take this ratio of 1 to 2, which means that 10,000 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad combatants were killed and 20,000 civilians, including many children. If that's the case, first of all, people around the world
Based on Hamas figures.
no, but Israel would say that it's 1 to 1. So let's say it's 15,000 to 15,000, still a very high number. But if Netanyahu now says that only 80% of the work has been done, still 20% to go. If you then multiply this percentage with the number of civilians to be killed, obviously some people around the world, even pro-Israeli sympathizers, wouldn't want that to happen. And also, you can go back to the the State Department press briefing yesterday. What happened was that the spokesperson announced that the Hamas commander, Faik Mabhouh, who was obviously an official in their internal security, the head of operations for them, was killed by Israel.
At Shifa Hospital.
At Shifa Hospital. Now comes an Arab journalist and says, but he was a police commander in charge of security for the convoys. Israel is killing those people who are facilitating the aid. Now, regardless of the answer, the question is now in the air, and people are influenced by such nonsense that these are the police escorts for the distribution. And all of us remember that even before the war, just on routine business, when Israel allowed trucks to go into Kerem Shalom or Erez or whatever, Karni, Hamas opened fire on the trucks just to show that it is in charge. It is calling the shots. It is also firing the shots. And it will decide who and when gets in.
You're referring actually to a Palestinian journalist who is at every State Department meeting, always asking about why is Israel doing genocide?
Where are the Israelis?
And exactly.
Where are the
That is a
Israeli
problem.
journalists?
I agree. Not only Israeli journalists, but Western civilization-minded.
Maybe it's better.
oriented.
Maybe they would have asked other questions you wouldn't want to listen to.
Indeed. Well, we don't have very much time left, and therefore I'd like still to touch on the Northern Front briefly, if I may. Each one of you has 1.5 minutes total. General Gavish, we'll start with you. What can you tell us about the Northern Front?
Yeah, but just one point to my colleague Amir that I usually agree with what he says. I wouldn't call those Hamas and Islamic Jihad combatants. They are not this is not the same family of combatants. Those are terrorists. I think we should all remember that this is what they are, furious terrorists. Their family is the Nazis and Al-Qaeda, ISIS. This is the family that they belong to. Going to the north, I would say that, unfortunately, I'm saying unfortunately because there is a fight in the north, although it is, we are saying more and we'll say it again and again that it is low intensity war, but there is a war. And when I'm saying unfortunately, it's mainly when I think talk about the civilians who lives in this area that were evacuated from their houses. Today I had the option to speak with the mayor of Kiryat Shmone. And it is really sad to understand what is going on in this area. Also, I had to state with the mayor of another area in the north, Galil Elyon. And when you talk with both of them, you understand that the situation is very hard because most of the civilians are not there. They cannot come back yet. They don't have a date or something like this when things would be better, so they would come be able to go back to this. And basically, most of those people are refugees in their homeland. So the situation is complex, and I thought it would be important to say those things today after talking with these two important civil servants.
To remind our viewers, 61,000 Israelis have been relocated internally in Israel following the attack by Hezbollah against Israel, joining basically Hamas in the war on October 8th. And an additional roughly 40,000, of course, the estimates vary, have displaced themselves internally also within Israel out of their own volition because they didn't want their children to live under rocket fire and the threat of the atrocities of October 7th in the south reoccurring subsequently in the north, a reality that cannot be accepted, of course. Professor Rosenthal, what can Israel do, and to what degree does it have a mandate at this stage, irrespective of its intentions and the reality on the ground, to push Hezbollah northward from the Litani River in line with UN Security Council Resolution 1701?
Well, being frank about it, when you look at, again, the way in which discussion at large is taking place in Europe, if you talk UN Resolution 1701 on Lebanon and the Litani River, of course, we would say, Europeans would say that this resolution is to be executed and should be implemented. But immediately the counter move from the anti-Israel lobbies and parts of public opinion would be that Israel should be equally willing to do its share in following suit on UN resolutions. That's the way it goes. At the same time, it is very, very difficult indeed to make people in Europe understand that it is not just 7th of October, but it is already for years that both in the north and in the south of Israel, and also in central Israel, people are living continuously under the threat of rockets and missiles coming from Gaza in the south, and Lebanon, Hezbollah in the north. And when I, for instance, say again and again in the public media in the Netherlands that the Dutch should understand that what would happen if there would be a continuous barrage of rockets and terrorist attacks from Belgium into the southern parts of the Netherlands, do understand what that would mean for the Dutch compared to others in the world, then this message is actually not taken very seriously indeed. That's the way it goes. So the bottom line, if I may say, is that we should stick to the notion that when a terrorist organization invades Israel and goes for a slaughter we have never seen after the Holocaust, then it is indeed a full-fledged right of the Israel to go for its self-defense.
Indeed. Well, there's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Professor Uri Rosenthal, General Doron Gavish, and Mr. Amir Oren, of course, for taking your time to update us on the latest. And I'd like to thank all of you at home. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.